They thought it was a routine bag check until one item triggered an urgent call to a number no one had ever seen before. Northwind International Airport was not the busiest in the world, nor the largest, but it had a way of making its passengers feel as though they were passing through the center of something important. The vaulted glass ceiling spilled daylight across marble floors, making every rolling suitcase and hurried step gleam like part of a choreographed performance. Flight announcements echoed faintly against the vast glass, their voices calm, almost soothing. Elias Mercer blended into it effortlessly. He was the sort of man you'd forget the moment you looked away. Tall but not imposing, gray hair neatly trimmed, a soft blazer worn over a travel-worn shirt, shoes that had seen years of walking but still held their shape. In his right hand, he carried a canvas weekender bag, scuffed along the corners, its handles worn smooth by years of use. It looked like the kind of bag someone carried when they had learned to pack only what truly mattered. Security Lane C was quiet compared to the others. Officer Jana Rook, a woman whose posture never faltered, stood behind the scanner's monitor. She had the kind of stillness that comes from years of practice, calm, methodical, with a habit of tapping her silver ring against the gray trays before sliding them forward. It was a small sound, like the tick of a metronome. Mercer handed over his boarding pass with a polite nod. The scanner beeped its approval. He stepped forward, arms raised for the body scan, his expression unreadable. The machine showed nothing unusual. No alarms, no sudden flashes of orange or red on the screen. Everything was routine until his bag slid into the X-ray machine. The image on Jana's monitor froze for half a second before outlining a small object with a sharp, almost defiant density. She frowned. Inside the bag were the expected travel items, a change of clothes, a toiletry kit, a book, but nestled between them was something else, a flat, circular object about the size of a compact disc, but far too dense for its size. The software flagged it in yellow. "Bag check on Lane C," Jana called out. Officer Darrell Cade stepped forward, pulling on gloves. He was broad-shouldered and careful, the kind of man who treated fragile things as if they could break the air around them. He unzipped the bag and began removing items one by one until he reached a small fabric-wrapped pouch. The stitching was precise, almost ornamental, as if made by someone who believed in permanence. Inside was the object, a slate-colored disc resting in a felt cradle the color of deep twilight. No brand, no markings except for a faint engraved ring near the edge. When Cade tilted it toward the light, a shimmer of letters appeared, like ink reluctantly coming to the surface. "What is it?" Cade asked, glancing at Mercer. "A keepsake," Mercer replied calmly. "Of what?" "An old job." Jana ran a swab over the object's edge. The analyzer beeped softly and returned nothing. No chemical traces, no explosives, nothing at all. That was strange in itself. Even the most harmless things usually returned some signature. She lifted it slightly, and for a moment she swore she could feel, not temperature exactly, but the memory of it, warm and cold at the same time, like touching the shadow of something once alive. Leaning closer, she read the faint inscription circling the rim. "For immediate repatriation, dial 907, cipher 12. At the supervisor's podium, Chief Dalton Reed looked up. Reed had a reputation for steadiness under pressure and for recognizing when something wasn't what it seemed. The alert on his console read, "Secondary screening, unknown object." He approached, his eyes scanning the disc with a look that was more calculation than curiosity. "Mr. Mercer," Reed said, reading the name from the boarding pass, "we'll need to continue this in a private room." Mercer didn't argue. Of course. The private screening room was designed to be forgettable. White walls, metal table, 2 chairs, a mounted camera that didn't bother hiding. Reed set the disc on the table. Up close, its surface seemed to shift subtly, like a map drawn on water. He glanced at the inscription again. "If we dial that number," Reed asked, "what happens?" "Someone answers," Mercer said. "Someone who doesn't like being known." Reed hesitated, then picked up the landline in the corner of the room, an old, heavy model, the kind you'd expect to see in a 1980s office. He dialed the sequence. The tone on the other end shifted, faintly distorted. Then came a voice, calm, precise, and somehow aware of him. "Supervisor Dalton Reed," it said, unprompted. "You are in possession of a repatriation credential." Reed glanced at Mercer, who sat still, hands folded. "Possession confirmed." "Is the petitioner alive?" the voice asked. "Yes." "Is the petitioner willing?" Mercer's eyes didn't move from Reed's. "I am unwilling." A pause. "Then return the object to the petitioner. Permit them to board without delay. Do not record this encounter. Do not write it down. Report to the address on the back of the card without an address." "And if I refuse?" Reed asked. "You will be noticed by a city that does not exist," the voice said, and hung up. Reed replaced the receiver slowly. They returned the disc to its felt cradle, zipped the weekender closed, and handed it back to Mercer, who thanked them with the quiet politeness of a man leaving a closed room in which something irreversible had just happened. The hum of the engines became a steady backdrop, like the low thrum of a distant storm. Mercer sat still, eyes closed, but his breathing was too measured for sleep. Jana, 2 rows back, studied him with the casual glances of someone who had practiced observation without being noticed. The man in the charcoal suit across the aisle occasionally shifted his gaze toward Mercer, but only when he thought no one was looking. Half an hour into the flight, a light ping announced the seatbelt sign turning off. Passengers began moving around, stretching legs, opening laptops. Mercer reached into his bag and removed the disc. He turned it slowly in his hands, as if weighing not the object, but the decision to keep it out in the open. Jana's eyes narrowed. She noticed the man in the suit straighten subtly, his right hand brushing the inside of his jacket, checking something concealed. A firearm, a badge, or something worse. When the flight attendant approached with the beverage cart, Mercer ordered water. As the attendant moved on, the suited man rose from his seat and headed toward the lavatory, but not before giving Mercer a brief, knowing glance. Jana stood. She moved into the aisle under the pretense of letting another passenger pass, but her real intention was to intercept. As she neared the lavatory, she saw the man wasn't inside. He had bypassed it entirely and was now at the rear galley, speaking in low tones to someone who clearly wasn't crew. The other man, a tall figure in a navy windbreaker, kept one hand in his pocket. Jana caught a fragment of their conversation over the engine noise. "Needs to be done before landing. We can't let it reach them." She froze. It could only mean the disc. Back in his seat, Mercer seemed to sense the shift in the air. His eyes moved to the cabin's reflection in the darkened window. He caught sight of Jana moving toward the galley and the suited man glancing back at him. He slid the disc into an inner pocket of his blazer and reached down to unlace one shoe, not out of discomfort, but to access the thin nylon pouch hidden inside. From it, he withdrew a folded slip of paper no larger than a train ticket. Written in neat block letters were 3 lines. "If approached, do not resist. If followed, do not lead them home. If taken, break the silence." The engine's hum was interrupted by the captain's voice announcing mild turbulence ahead. Passengers buckled in. Jana returned to her seat, but her posture was different now, alert, coiled. She had seen the second man in the windbreaker slip something metallic into the beverage cart when the crew wasn't looking. 20 minutes later, the cabin lights dimmed for the descent. City lights glittered below like a constellation spilled across the ground. Mercer's hand rested lightly over the disc in his pocket, his gaze fixed ahead. Jana leaned slightly into the aisle, scanning for the suited man, only to find his seat empty. A sudden shift. The suited man was now 2 rows behind Mercer, leaning forward as if to speak. Jana unbuckled quickly, stepping into the aisle just as the man reached into his jacket. The impact came faster than thought, a sharp motion, a glint of steel, and Mercer's hand snapping up to catch the man's wrist mid-strike. Gasps rippled through the nearby passengers. The cabin crew rushed forward, but Mercer's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay back. He's not alone." Indeed, the man in the windbreaker was now advancing from the front of the cabin, his right hand gripping something under the fabric. Jana moved, intercepting him, her own badge flashing briefly as she drew a compact sidearm from her concealed holster. The plane jolted slightly as landing gear deployed. In that momentary distraction, the suited man twisted free and reached for Mercer's inner pocket. Mercer shifted, letting the momentum carry both of them into the aisle. The disc slipped free, spinning once before clattering against the metal floor. The sound it made was wrong, too resonant, like a bell struck in a cavern. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. The suited man lunged, but Mercer was faster, scooping the disc into his palm. As the plane's wheels screeched onto the runway, Mercer leaned toward Jana and whispered, "They'll follow us off the plane. Don't let them get the disc. If you lose me, go to the address with no address." Before Jana could respond, the aircraft slowed to taxi speed. The suited man and the windbreaker exchanged a look, then melted back into the flow of passengers preparing to disembark. The jet bridge was a narrow funnel of tension. Mercer stepped out first, blending into the stream of travelers. Jana tried to keep him in sight, but the crowd shifted, and for a moment he was gone. Then she saw him, halfway down the terminal, moving toward an unmarked door. He glanced back once, met her eyes, and was gone. The suited man appeared seconds later, following. Jana broke into a run, but by the time she reached the door, it was locked. From somewhere beyond, faint and distorted, came the sound of a phone ringing.